You're listening to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 48. Hey, therapist, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have a guest. I have Dr. Lisa Herbert. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen, for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your story and have other therapists hear your story as well. So I will kick it off to you. And if you could just tell me a little bit about your burnout story, that's how we start our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So my burnout story really is, I think, rooted in what a lot of physicians sort of go through. As you may know, your audience, may have seen, I'm sure, in a lot of the media publications that physicians have a really high rate of burnout. Upward now towards about 63%, which is pretty high. And that
Wow.
number has only increased, since obviously the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, it was around the 50s. Now it's as high as 63%. So I was one of those physicians who actually, went through burnout. And it was earlier on in my career. So I'm a family physician. I had my own private practice. I practiced for about 25 years, actually. So a lot longer than, what the time period of what most physicians are staying in clinical medicine now. But I would say probably around maybe 10 years or so, or 15 years or so into my practice, I knew something was different. Like I started just to feel different. There was this feeling of just being exhausted. And for physicians, a lot of
Yes.
times, we can't tell the difference sometimes because, there's just fatigue in the work that we do, right? Because it's long hours. Um, a lot of times we are on call. So, there are a lot of nighttime interruptions. So the fatigue thing really just didn't hit me at first as being a sign of burnout. But then I started to realize that this fatigue was different. So no matter how much rest, I got, I would go on vacation, come back still exhausted, did all the things and still had this dragging feeling, this emotional exhaustion. So that's when I knew something was wrong. And then there were some other little things happening as well. And it was really when my daughter, who is now 27, but at the time she was 13, she basically said to me, Mom, something is wrong. Like, you're just not the same person that you were before. You're not as happy as you were. And it just really, hit me, in my gut because we have a really close relationship. And I didn't want to show up as that person for her or my son at the time. So I started to just kind of take some time away. I stepped away from my practice because I had to get a handle, pretty much on what was going on and realized that this burnout thing was real. So there was the emotional exhaustion. I was irritable a lot, didn't find joy anymore in practice, started to just, I wouldn't say isolate myself, but certainly take myself out of the situations that used to, really bring me joy before. Started to be a little cynical, about things, depersonalization, all those signs and symptoms. So once I realized what it was, I knew that I needed to get help for it. And, thankfully enough, I was self-aware enough at that time that I knew I needed to do that. And, I actually had a therapist that I went to try to help me to get through it. I hired a coach as well to help me to figure out, what my next steps were going to be in terms of my career path. And that sort of led me down this path of self-discovery of one, things that I knew that I needed to do that I was not doing. Like we can talk about this, a little later, but like creating boundaries, getting rest for myself, speaking up when I needed to, not taking on as much, not feeling like I have to take on, as much
Mhm.
work as I did. And so that self-discovery process that I went through and realizing what it was and that I had options. And I think that's what a lot of people sometimes feel stuck, is that they don't realize that you do have options. There are other choices that you can make. So a choice for me at that time was to slow down my practice and then figure out what the next steps were, for me in terms of my career. And I decided after practicing all of that time, I spent a little time doing some non-clinical work and healthcare leadership, and then realized that the coaching is what really spoke to me. One, because I experienced it myself and the positive things that it brought to me and my life and my family, but I knew that it could also help my colleagues as well. So I
Yeah,
sort of went down the path of coaching, and that's where I am today.
that's awesome. I have so many questions.
And I gave you a lot, so I hope I didn't.
Oh, no, no. Yeah, I mean, I think I could kinda go into so many different directions, but I think a couple of the things that resonate with my group of people is just feeling so tired and
Mhm.
feeling like you have to take it all on, that the workload really doesn't stop.
Right.
And there's just something interesting about, like, that 10-year mark of being, like, really into your career, and that
Mm,
often coincides for a lot of highly educated women around midlife, around a
yes.
very, difficult time, and I think a lot of women's life, particularly women, that's a majority of my audience. There are, I'm sure, a few men who listen to this podcast and probably that you work with as well, but I think,
Yeah.
females in healthcare, therapists, or folks that do this kind of really helping work, it's just so much.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that we are, as healthcare providers, I just used a broad term, we're caregivers, right? So our day to day is really taking care of people. And unless we've really recognized that, we have to sort of put boundaries around that, even, and carve out some time for ourselves, so that we can fill our cups as well,
Yeah.
as much as we give to others, that we can end up, in this state of burnout and the state of just being um, chronically stressed and just feeling like you just don't have enough energy to give anymore because it's all been given away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I was also curious about your perspective as a physician. Like, what does that look what's the kinda different flavor of your burnout because of your training? I know you guys yeah, I don't know. In my mind, I'm imagining doctors on call early in their training. They have to work, like, these 24-hour shifts, sleeping at the hospital. So just give me a little window into kinda how doctors are socialized and how that really shows up in your burnout differently, perhaps.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, early on, our training, well, if we start even from before we get to medical school, a lot of us are high achievers,
Yeah, of course, you have to
Right, they
be.
have to be type A personality. We want everything to be perfect, and then we have to be the best, obviously, because you're dealing in the situation of a physician's life and death. So
Right.
so there's that pressure to always, be 100%, to be on top of it, to not make a mistake, and a lot of times I don't feel like during our training that we are made to feel as if we're humans, because we are. Humans make mistakes,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, we all need to have the support that everyone else has as well, from other in other industries. So you have that. You have also just the amount of training, that we have to endure as well. So that's 4 years of medical school, consuming an enormous amount of education and knowledge in what seems like a long period of time, but it's actually a short period of time when you look at the amount of information that you have to learn. So again, there's this competition. There's just this thing of feeling like you have to be the best. You have to be 100% all the time. You have to be perfect, and then you're competing to get into a residency program where they're very, minimal spots, per specialty. You get into a residency program, and then it's like the wheels just keep turning, right?
Yeah.
So
How long is
the
your residency? Or
yeah, so it's
typical?
specialty dependent, but
Yeah.
primary care is typically 3 years. So that's 4 years of medical school, 3 years of a residency program. If you are in a specialty like surgery, that's 5 years. If you are like a neurosurgeon, that's 7 years. Plastic surgeon, that's 7 years. So it really just depends on the specialty, but it's
Yeah.
anywhere between 3 to 7 years. And during that time, you are seeing high volume patients. You're seeing, obviously very critical patients. You're on a call schedule. So, they've tried to improve upon the call schedule now, but I mean, there was a time where we'd be on call every third night. So just imagine every third night being up 24 hours and then having
Right.
to go in the next day and then having to still perform and see
Right. Which is
patients,
dangerous.
which is dangerous. Exactly.
Yeah. I
So,
thought
like
I
I
heard
said, it has
something more
improved.
recently. They were trying to limit, how much doctors had to be on call, but probably back when you were training, if you've been, you
Yeah,
know, if you trained 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was
it was
like,
not the case. It was not the case, and it was no way of getting around it, over it, under it. That was really just sort of how it was.
yeah,
And now, like you mentioned as well. Thank goodness they are making some adjustments around, how much time a resident can spend on call or within a 24-hour period. But yeah, so there's the long hours, there's the call, and then there's this sense of just having to show up for each patient that you see in a given day and be able to give to that person
yeah,
because you want to, right? But after, seeing sometimes 20, 30 patients a day, that can get that can be a little draining, right?
of course.
And just imagine the also physicians that had to work through COVID,
Yeah.
and just seeing patients, just dying every day and not being able to
Mhm.
sometimes do anything about that. So taking on that, right? And internalizing sometimes a lot of that, not having the space to debrief about it, not having the space to grieve about it, and sometimes not even feeling like you can go seek help because of maybe some repercussions that may happen, from that.
Mhm.
So yeah. So that's
Yeah, I
that's
was
sort of the
I was still in
difference.
practice during that time, and so I did see a couple of not only doctors, but nurses and, um, like, med assistants and stuff like that. I remember them telling me
Mhm.
stories of like, having to get in a PAPR. I don't even know what a PAPR was, but, they would tell me about how they would get into it and what it was like, and, you it took a long time to get in the thing, so, like, if you
Yeah.
had to use the bathroom or, do any kind of self-care, that wasn't happening, and, sometimes, like, staff would forget about them in the PAPR and
Yeah.
that they needed something. So, and in all the layers to like the trauma that medical professionals experienced, I think in the pandemic, still dealing with that.
Right.
If they didn't happen to leave medicine because of that, if they're still in medicine, still dealing with patients and the trauma
Mm.
of all of that, seeing people die on a large, large scale,
Yeah.
which maybe they hadn't seen before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for a lot of physicians too, for the most part, we go into this because we want to help people, right? And I think that when um, there are obstacles and challenges, difficulties that are placed in your way that don't allow you to do that, then that even becomes something that's just more stress and more, trauma, if you will, that starts to creep in as well. Because now I can't do the thing that I really want to. I can't do the thing
Yeah.
that I love because I have to, somehow try to figure a way around it or deal with this difficulty.
Yeah, that makes sense. I talk so much about insurance on here
Hmm.
because, and I just read what came out about mental health parity that they're trying to eh, supposedly, right? They're gonna cover equally mental health as
Mm,
physical health, which they were supposed to do, but it hasn't happened. And so I think they were saying a huge percentage, I don't have the percentage in my mind, of people are going, I have to go out of network. to
Yeah.
get mental health care. And because they're not paying therapists close to what they're being paid for,
Mhm.
physical health
Sure.
conditions, like similar to maybe even a physical therapist or something with like a kind of
Wow.
commensurate training or something. But I think it's like navigating that system. So we all want to care, whatever your specialty is, if that's a medical doctor, if that's a therapist, psychologist, we want
Mhm.
to provide that care. Yet, maybe we're not getting paid for that care, and we have to be on the phone with the insurance company for a bunch of hours to figure out payment, or we're limited to 15 minutes to be with our patient. For you, likely,
Yeah.
for me, that's 45 or 50 minutes.
Yeah.
But what can you really do? I always think of when I go see my doctor, how are they like really getting a sense of what I need and then providing, continuity of care, like contacting other folks that I see, like my OBGYN or like this one or that
Yeah.
one.
So to your point, yeah, a lot of times that doesn't happen, right? In that 15-minute visit. And that's where the burnout comes in as well, because a lot of docs and healthcare professionals are taking that home. They're charting at home. They're trying to find time outside of work hours, to finish up the care that they feel that their patients need and deserve. So, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I'll transition to just ask you kind of how was your road out?
Hmm.
You had this place where you were knowing, like, I am burnout. This isn't working. So what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so definitely it was just the self-awareness, like I said, was huge. It was just, being open and having the help and the people around me who helped me to see, right, that that's sort of what I was going through and that I needed to get help. And so the way out for me was realizing that I needed to put myself first because I really was not doing that.
Yeah.
Getting the people in my life who I felt that would be helpful, letting my family in, talking to a therapist, like I said, getting a coach, and then developing what I considered my transition plan, right? So how was I going to now transition? Because I felt like I had given a lot of time and a lot of years and a lot of service. 20 years is a long, f- it's a long time to practice medicine, 20, 25 years. So I felt like that I had given enough time. I had served a lot of patients. I had done well in my community. And the realization that it was okay to leave, I had to come to grips with that, right? Because
Mhm.
that's a difficult decision that I think a lot of physicians, even people in other industries who are transitioning out of a career that they've had for so long, sort of goes through. So understanding that it was okay to leave, that I did have options, and then what would it look like to explore those options? So I worked with a coach. We developed, again, my transition plan and what that was going to look like. So for me, it was really thinking about what I wanted those next, start small, those next 3 to 5 years to look like. Who did I want to work with? What did I want to do? What did I see myself doing? What were my strengths? What was I good at? What was going to bring me joy? What was going to allow me to still help people because that was really important for me.
Mhm.
And once I realized that I could still use a lot of my skills that I had as a physician and that I had, acquired over the years, even some of my leadership roles, that I could use those skills to help other physicians and other healthcare professionals who were experiencing similar situations like I was, that I could be a support and a resource for them. So I started to chart my course in terms of what that would look like as being a coach and being that person, to help other people sort of bridge and move from where they were or where they are to where they want to be in the future. So I worked towards getting my certification as a coach, and slowly, again, just decreased my hours in my practice. Started to take on once I had obtained my coaching certification. Started to take on some coaching clients, and then once I felt like I was really really sure of was what I wanted to do, then I felt confident enough, and also that it seemed feasible financially, right? I was confident enough to sort of transition out of clinical practice at that time and fully devote my time to coaching. So initially, when I first started coaching, it was around helping physicians with work-life balance. That's what I thought, was going to be the thing that would help them to sort of move out of burnout and to thrive. And although that's important, what really came to me as the most important thing was helping them to develop leadership skills. And that's sort of where my leadership development sort of program developed in helping physicians thrive. So
Mhm.
those skills that we don't learn in medical school, how to speak up, how to negotiate, how to collaborate, how to have a voice, how to think strategically, developing your emotional intelligence, all those skills which are really important to help you develop a level of self-awareness that allows you to thrive.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I think a lot of people will be inspired to hear that. And I think the one thing I hear from people about making that pivot, because I talk a lot about the pivot more so than I think in the space, especially for therapists, you see people talking about like, I'm going to help you thrive in your role as a therapist or, go at a network and charge more and, be successful. But and some people do that. Like they can do it, but some people are just done. Some people are just,
Right.
I am done. It's time to
Right.
go.
Right.
So I help people to know that they're kind of at that point where they're done. Although I've helped people, been done with agency and go to private practice too. But sometimes we're just done and that's okay too. And sometimes we need that permission that it's okay that we're done.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of times I can see, the body language change, in my clients that I coach when I provide that space for them to say. So sometimes they haven't said it to anyone else, like I'm
Right.
done, you know, and to have them feel a level of acceptance that it is okay if that's your final decision and you've worked through all of the things, that maybe sometimes push us into making decisions maybe too quickly.
Right.
But if you've worked through all of that and you know it's not something based on fear or uncertainty, and you're pretty sure that that's the next step, then yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. And I think that the key piece that you're also talking about is that you had a plan, you didn't make a rash move. You weren't like,
Mhm.
you know, cash my check which sometimes I had dreams of, even though I worked for myself at the time, just because I think I was just so fatigued. And I
Yeah.
think it was working through the pandemic as a therapist. Honestly, it was like compassion fatigue. I was doing trauma work. That was my piece.
Mm,
That was my story. And I didn't like you said, I didn't believe for a long time I had options.
mhm.
Like I built this practice. I had all these clients. Like, how could I just how do I even start the process of looking at something else? But believing you have choices, believing your skills can translate, believing that you're scrappy, that you can figure this out, that,
Yeah.
like for me, I got a doctor degree. Dr. Herbert, you got a medical degree. And you talk to people that I have this high level of education. So I'm talking to mostly women about this. And I tell them, let's write down all those skills, all the things that you have done and have excelled at in your life.
Mhm.
And then tell me you have no options.
Exactly. Yeah, you're so right, and I do the same thing with my clients as well. And, sometimes I have to just bring up and remind them, think about a time when you had to
Mhm.
be resilient. Like, what was that? And what did you do? And how did you survive? Like, how did you get through it? So if you did it then, you can definitely, do it now. The
Yeah.
strength is there, the courage is there, the skills are there, you know, um, that never goes away.
Yeah, it's so true. It doesn't go away. And I think attending, one of my key things was my personal therapy too. I had a piece of like that I felt like I didn't have joy in a lot of things. after a while. That was the pandemic, that was stress, but that was some like level of a little bit of depression. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times burnout looks like depression. So I always tell
Yeah.
people like, don't be scared to get some support for that as well, because that could be a piece of this you're not addressing.
Mhm.
And it's hard to create from a place or vision from a place really of lack.
Yeah.
When you're in that place where I
Absolutely.
can't even see the sun through the cloud, no, we have to, you know, do some gardening at that point.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I think it's important too for, organizations to start to recognize the signs, right, in their employees, because what they describe a lot of time as, disruptive physicians, right, or,
Mm.
you know, not a team player. Now that could be. I mean, maybe that maybe that's the case. But we have to keep an open mind about external things that can be impacting the way people are behaving, right? Outside of just deciding that it's their personality. Like maybe there are some other things that we need to be more aware of and
Mm.
help those people.
That makes sense. Is it something in the culture that I think they have to look at that? I mean, I think of something one of my friends had told me, who's a physician, and the local hospital in my area, they give physicians 2 weeks off per year, period.
Mm,
And they can't,
wow.
or maybe it's like they can't take 2 consecutive weeks off in a row or something like that. Something
Mhm. Mhm.
that seems like for your level of training and education, how are they telling
How
a doctor when they can take their vacation?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But they're doing it.
But
And
they're doing it. Mhm.
I'm sure that's a huge piece of resentment, because then that freedom, which, is part of our humanity, we really want to feel like we have a sense of agency and freedom over our lives and control over what we want to do. I think
Yeah,
that can lead to some of that cynicism, resentment that we often see as a hallmark of burnout, too.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, talked about options, talked about, and maybe just talk a little bit more about leadership. Like, what, if you've been struggling with burnout, you've been struggling, maybe you feel like have no agency. Like, how do you work with people to develop some of that?
Yeah. Um, so I think it's important first to identify the person, if it is a coach, um, that resonates with your story, right? Someone maybe who has experienced the thing that you are seeking help for. Um, I think that it just makes the interaction a little bit more authentic. And I think it helps the person to open up a little bit more. So the first thing I would say is basically just find the right person, that's going to allow you to have that safe space to open up about the things that you might be struggling with. And then so once we sort of break down those barriers and break down those walls and start to have really a conversation around what they're feeling and what's going on, and it's sort of what has gotten them to that point, we can start to sort of peel back the layers of what things can we change in this situation, in terms of how you might be addressing problems. So, are you putting your head down about the problem, or are you confronting the problem right head on? And that's a skill. Being
Mhm.
able to manage conflict is a skill. So that's part of leadership development. When something's happening around you, are you aware that it's happening? Are you aware how it's affecting you? Are you aware how people are perceiving you? So that's self awareness, and that's also a leadership skill. So leadership is just a broad term, but there's so many different skills that are developed under that umbrella of leadership that really helps, or I find that helps physicians to um, sort of sometimes move through the burnout, recover, and come out better on the other side.
Yeah, great. Great. I'm curious about again, I'm going back to your process a little bit of making that transition, because I feel like a lot of folks get stuck in the leaving and how we start that process. Um, for me, a lot of that was math. It was just like figuring out how much do I need to earn? How am I going to make up that income? So I'm just wondering what kind of was your key, what's one of those key things that you can kind of go back and look at?
Hmm. This may sound very basic, but I really think a lot of it has to do with intuition. I mean, it has to do with your ability to know when it's right, when it's the right time,
Mhm.
right? Um, Obviously, you need the hard numbers. We need to know that financially we're going to be okay. We need to know that obviously this is a viable and a feasible plan, right? That we're going to move into. But you also have to feel that it's the right thing. So a lot of it is just the your intuition. It's understanding what feels right to you and being comfortable with that. And sometimes that's even a process for you to get to that point that you feel comfortable and confident in knowing that the choice that you're about to make is the right one. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was huge for me. It was a feeling like I knew that this was the right time based on obviously, factors and data and things that I accumulated, but just knowing internally that it was just the right time to do it.
Mhm. So, I mean, I think I'm hearing too, like you had some trust in yourself. You found trust in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which I think can be hard in burnout. So, I think a lot of people talk to me about like I don't even know if I'm making the right choice at this point because I chose therapy or I chose medicine or I chose, whatever field and I got it wrong in my head.
Right, right.
So, I think that it can look like for different people. I think it can look different. Some people might feel that initially and they can just move because they're like a fast actor. They can
Mm-hmm.
kind of know, okay, actually this is a great move. I'm going to make it and maybe make decisions easy. But there's I think also some people that can take a little longer to get there, to
Yeah.
trust themselves and to say like, you know what? I'm never going to feel 100%. That's me. So I just have to get to maybe like 75, 80%. And then I'm just going to move when it's 70 to
Yeah.
80%, maybe even 50.
Yeah. And I tell my clients too, don't think about it as putting yourself in a box or feeling like you have to make the right decision. Just make the best decision. Make the
Yeah.
best decision for you. What's the best decision for you right now? And if it ends up not being the best decision, a couple of months or years down the line, that's okay too. We come back to now understanding that we have options and we have choices and we can pivot, right? And do things differently. And then I think it's also helping people understand or helping them develop this sense of hope, right?
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
that things will get better, right? And actually trusting and believing that there's a better way to do things.
Yeah. And I think just from talking with people that have been through it before and come out the other side, that there is hope that they don't have to feel that feeling forever.
Mhm.
I think I can't remember the quote, but no feeling is final is the quote, the author. I can't remember. I'll put it I think it's Rilke. I want to say it's Rilke, but it's often a quote I would use when I was working in therapy because we feel like our feelings are final, that they have written everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
But things can and will change, especially if we're actively working towards making them change. So,
Yeah.
making that pivot, making that next best decision based on the information we have at the time
Mhm.
is going to continue moving us forward. Maybe we'll take a step back, but we still keep going forward
Yeah.
if we look at the long
Definitely.
trajectory.
Yeah. No, that's great. And high achievers tend to always want to have everything in their basket too, right? Before they make that next step. So they
Yeah.
want to have every box checked, every resource, researched, everything sort of ready to go. And a lot of times that causes paralysis. So people don't move because they just feel like that they have to do that next thing,
Yeah.
check that next box. And it's important, like you mentioned, to just understand that we can start where we are and use what we have,
Yeah,
to move forward.
totally. Well, Dr. Herbert, what is finding you joy right now as we close?
Wow. For me, joy is just um waking up in the morning, having a great cup of coffee and
Yes.
and sitting outside on my deck.
And I didn't ask you what part of the country you're in, but where
Yeah. So I'm in Georgia.
you're in
And
Georgia.
I'm actually a New Yorker, born and raised
Okay.
in Brooklyn, New York. And I moved to Georgia about 4 years ago, partly because of family and partly because of the weather, because I was tired of the northern winters, right? So I moved to
I
Georgia
live
for
in Maine.
the.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's beautiful right now, though.
Yes. So, 2 months out of the year, maybe it's cold here, if that. But
No,
so
it's
I
never
love
cold. It's never cold.
I love the outdoors. So this has been a
Yeah.
great transition for me. Yeah.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love my coffee, my time. I call it my time with my coffee,
Hmm.
just to kind of sit and like rest and contemplate, kind of ease into the day. I love a
Yes.
coffee moment. So it's one of my
Yes.
favorite parts of the day too. Awesome. So where can people find you if they would like to reach out?
Yeah. So I am on all social media at Dr. Lisa Herbert. That's Dr. Lisa Herbert. My website is drlisaherbert.com. So you can go to my website, find out more information about me and what I do. And you can schedule a discovery call if you'd like to find out more information about my coaching programs. But yeah, just follow me on social media. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you're over
Mhm.
there, then yeah, just follow me or connect. I'll be happy to connect.
Awesome. I keep telling people LinkedIn's where it's at.
Yeah.
I know. I like it on there lately. So
Yeah,
awesome.
it's
Well, thank you
awesome.
so much for joining us. I'm sure a lot of people are going to get some great insights from our conversation.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.